Jeremy Wells, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Very excited to have you. Also, a big welcome to the Export Beer Garden studio, which is probably a bit like a second home to you. Is this your happy place in here?
I've never faced this way before, so I'm facing a different way. And that's, this is mainly an audio medium, so it probably won't make a lot of sense. But normally I face behind me and watch the screen and commentate sports for the ACC. And what I'm doing is I'm actually facing two people. and I'm facing the spot where I normally am, which is quite sort of discombobulated.
It's a little bit job interviewee, isn't it?
It's got that vibe.
It's like travelling in a van when they had the seats that face the wrong way on a sports trip when you're going through, and no one ever wanted to sit on that seat because you'd start to feel nauseous as you travelled to Riparoa or Rotorua.
Yeah, I was never a big fan of sitting in a 4-seat backwards, because on the bus there were two rows of 4-seat. There was the one on the front, the 4 seats in the front on the ARA buses, the old ARA buses, the old Mercedes ARA buses, and then there was the ones at the back, and I was never a fan of going backwards. I still don't like going backwards on trains. It just makes me feel a bit sick, actually.
And you've got a long history on trains as well, Jerry.
I have spent some time on trains.
In the caboose.
You seem to have been listening to something that I must have said before.
Yeah, look, we'll get into all the good stuff. So long-time listeners will know you've been on our hit list basically since we started this pod about 4 years ago. So a really big hit for us, and we were just chatting on the drive up about our broadcasting pillars of influence growing up. And for me, you're alongside Mark Ellis, the old Havoc, and probably Lee Hart. It's guys who really sort of helped influence me through my teenage years. Shay, you got anyone else on that list?
I didn't know you were going to... maybe like Suzanne Paul and Anthony Ray in the infomercial days.
Oh, okay, infomercial days, not Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Well, I mean, they were in that as well. You put me on the spot, you asshole. Yeah.
What a show that was, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And I suppose people listening might not remember Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but that was an absolute ratings juggernaut for TV2 around about the time when I actually started broadcasting. And that was on TV2, and that was doing in those days early 20s, which means 20-something% of the people in New Zealand at that time are watching that show, which at the time was around about over 1 million people watching that show. Suzanne Paul turning up with Anthony Ray Parker to someone's house and having dinner with cameras that they were using where nobody had ever cleaned the lens. And so you're looking through these horrific early digital cameras watching this, and it was made super cheap, and it just made so much money in those days, that show. That was the pinnacle of television in 1998.
Wow.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
And I always thought they were a package, so I was a bit ripped off when Suzanne Paul wasn't in any of the Matrix movies, or the first Matrix for sure, because Anthony Ray stole the scene in the as Dozer, I think he was.
Was he in The Matrix?
Yeah.
Anthony Ray Parker?
Very much so.
Really?
Very much so. If I'm proven to be wrong, this is going to make a hell of an outtake, but I'm pretty confident he was there.
Okay. He's not related to Ray Parker Jr., is he?
No.
The sung Ghostbusters.
No. Which, as a film, hasn't aged well. I watched it recently. It's not... The Bill Murray character with pesting on Sigourney Weaver it's not good watching in 2023.
Yeah, because the Anthony Ray Parker, well, no, it's just Ray Parker Jr. song as well, was actually a rip-off of Huey Lewis's song. Is it Got a New Drug, or... You know that song?
No, I don't.
It got found to be plagiarised in the end.
Oh.
Yeah, had to pay a lot of money to Huey Lewis.
Ed Sheeran areas.
That's good inside.
It's an amazing encyclopedia of knowledge up in that big old brain of yours.
I don't know about that. There's information up to a certain point, and I've talked about this before. There's information going up to around about 1992, and then it's very scarce from 92 on. But before 92, I seem to have remembered everything that anybody ever said to me.
So the way we normally do things is canvass our guests' friends and family to get some good oil on some inside lines. But it's a little bit different with you, and we got some good stuff, but a lot of the feedback came back saying his whole life is basically out there. He talks about it every morning, like, what do you want? He's told all of his stories. And I think that's actually probably a pretty good place to start, is you're burning the candle at both ends. You got the breakfast radio in the morning and 7 Sharp at night. And coming into this, we were a little bit intimidated because he's such a busy guy. How's he going to find time for us? But how busy is life for you?
Not that busy. I mean, you do two things. So I've got to be at radio in the morning, and that's every morning. And big part of radio is turning up. In fact, most of radio is really turning up and just being there. And if you're there, then it's all good. And if you're in the studio just listening to what people are saying, that's a great job. Then after that probably finishes. You have a bit of a meeting, you talk about things, you do whatever you're going to do. And then I probably get home at 10:30, something like that, 11. Then I like to do some exercise, maybe go for a run, maybe on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. That's what actually, it's very structured. And then I have lunch at home, and then around about 2-ish, just after 2 normally, I head into TVNZ. And I'm lucky because I live reasonably close, and both TVNZ and NZME, which is where I do Radio Hauraki, are very close to each other. In fact, they're just across the road. And so if I want to go between the two, it's nice and easy. So my life is really kind of contained to quite a small area. And then I'm there until, obviously, 7 sharps at 7. And then I get home normally around about, I don't know, 8 o'clock, something like that. And that's me. That's me every day.
And you've been doing that at 7 Sharp 4 years now, I think it is?
This is our sixth year. Since 2018.
Does it feel manageable, this workload of doing it?
Yeah, weirdly enough, when I first started doing it, I thought, this is going to be intense. And then I think like anything, you start doing it, and then after a while, it's like kind of a fitness. You become more fit at it. And it gets easier. Also, I reckon broadcasting has a rhythm, and I just lost my rhythm there. But broadcasting has a rhythm, and once you get the rhythm of it, and then it kind of takes on its own thing. And I think with 7 Sharp when I first started, and I remember the first 7 Sharp that I did, I was absolutely terrified because it's live, and you come off the back of the news, and there was a lot of expectation around what it was going to be and all that sort of stuff. And there were articles in the paper. And Hillary and I were new. We didn't really know each other very well. And then you start off on that, and they cue you in your ear. I could feel my heart beating through my chest. And, with a lapel microphone that sits down on your chest, I was absolutely sure that microphone could pick up my heart beating through my chest because I was so nervous. And you're reading on auto cue, but it's live. You don't want to make a mistake. The main thing is you want to get through that first show and just not make a mistake. So that's quite freaky.
Is the nerves about the ad-libbing parts, or is it the auto cue, or is it just the whole experience?
The nerves is just the idea that a lot of people are watching, and I think you put the nerves on yourself because you just have a level of expectation. You want to do well. You want to not make mistakes. It's really about not making mistakes, I think, because the ad-libbing part of it is like that's just talking. That's fine. But when it comes to reading an auto cue, that was not something that I'd never really read an auto cue before. So that was quite a new area for me. I'd done it a little bit on Eddie Media Lunch, was reading an auto cue in the studio, but we'd do, I don't know, 12 episodes, 10 episodes a year of that. And so I'd only read the auto cue 10 times a year for like 2 hours, on a Sunday or something. So it is definitely a craft. Reading an auto cue and a lot of people go, reading an auto cue, it's actually harder than what people think, I think. And it takes time. And when you're learning live in front of 500,000 people, it's quite a brutal place to learn. And that's the thing, is that there was no rehearsal for 7 Sharp. It's not like we quickly went over what we were going to do. You don't rehearse in using current affairs at TVNZ. You just do. And you do it live. And also, but I was lucky because I was sitting beside Hillary, and she is like the best, I think, the best presenter in New Zealand. And so I was lucky that she gave me incredible confidence that she was just sitting there. And I kind of just watched her, and over the years I've just watched the way that she does things, and she's a particularly good reader. And also she can go and this is a rare thing in New Zealand, when you go auto cue and you can ad lib, and you would never know whether someone's reading auto cue or they're ad libbing. Now that's a great skill. Yeah. That's actually quite hard because the two parts of your brain are completely different. You're reading words and you have to read them accurately, or you are thinking creatively out of your own brain. Totally different. So you're going between two brains, which is challenging.
Tell me, is the 7 Sharp set like right next to the news set? So do they just literally spin the cameras around?
Yes, it was. In those days it was.
Right.
Now it's in a different place.
Okay.
Now it's moved down to Studio 1A, which is actually the first ever Havoc studio that we had in MTV. It's the same studio. We're facing the same way.
Still a soda stream in the corner?
You know what? It probably is. It's probably in the room next door. I wouldn't be surprised, because there's next door they do all the Foley for Shortland Street, and they do, which Foley's like all the sound effects that they put in afterwards. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there that's like, this is very familiar to me, all this stuff from 25 years ago. But yeah, it's quite weird. So we're now in the same studio. Wow. Obviously a different set, but yeah, we moved at certain times. We moved because of COVID originally, because we couldn't have Simon and Wendy and Hillary and I in the same bubble. They couldn't do that, because if they lost presenters at that time, there was nobody else to cover, and it was quite problematic. So that things went weird during COVID, and then we ended up upstairs, and we didn't have a set, and now we've got a new set, which is somewhere slightly different. But in those days, it was opposite each other, yeah.
We kind of glossed over the number you said before. It's like 500,000. I think I had a figure of 471,000 New Zealanders every night tuning in to 7 Sharp, roughly. When you first took the job, I'm interested in that process of how you got the job, and did you audition, did you screen test, but also like thinking about that many people watching you. Is that different to breakfast radio?
Yeah, I don't tend to think much about the audience. I think that first time I definitely was thinking about the amount of people watching, and over time you forget, and then you're just in a set with someone, or you're in a studio with your friends. That's kind of how it is. You don't think about it so much. I think if you generally think about 470,000 people and them watching, it can be quite confusing, because the other thing is 470,000 people. If you saw them in a stadium or something, that would be a lot of people.
It would be a lot of people.
And all those people have lives. All those people have their own things that they're into. They have cares, and they have worries, and they have loves, and they have torment, and they have all sorts of stuff, tastes. And if you start to try and think, how do I make these people happy? 470,000, you can't. It's such a hard thing to get your head around. So I think I try not to think about any of that, and I never kind of have. I think the main thing is, if you're with someone, I'm sitting beside Hillary, she's a friend of mine, I'm thinking if you make Hillary laugh, then generally that will, you'd hope, be entertaining for some of the people who are watching. If the majority of people are okay, if they don't hate you, then you're okay. Yeah. And radio's different. I think radio is a different thing than TV. The two mediums are so far apart. The skills that you use, the type of part of your brain that you go to, the rhythm of it, all of those things are so different. The idea that you could be on radio and then just go and be on TV, I don't know. That to me, they're different things.
Back to getting the gig, 7 Sharp. Does someone call your agent or say, hey, we want Jerry to come in and do a reading for 7 Sharp, or how does that actually come about?
Well, it was just before. No, when was it? I think it was before. Oh, now I don't. I can't really remember exactly how it came about. I remember John Gillespie, who is the head of News and Current Affairs, called me up and said, "Do you want to have a chat?" And this must have been just before Christmas, I think, in 2017. And I said, yeah. And so we had to go to a secret location away from TVNZ, and he said, you may know, but Mike and Tony, who did 7 Sharp, are leaving, and Hillary's going to be doing 7 Sharp, and we were wondering if you'd be interested in doing 7 Sharp. Is it something that you'd be interested in? And I said, yeah, that's something that I'm interested in. And then he said, okay, cool. Well, we'll keep in touch. And then we finished that conversation. And then it must have been a week or so later or something like that. And then he came back and said, can we sit down and talk about doing this more seriously? I said, sure. And then it sort of started like that. But I don't have an agent, so I just sort of chatted to him myself.
At the time, you were very well known for your incredible Mike Hosking impersonation, which was so dialed in and so accurate, you almost couldn't tell them apart. when you're in that meeting and they've called you in and they're saying, "Oh, do you want to replace Mike?" Is there a moment where you're thinking, "Hang on, this is a bit odd"?
Oh, 100%. I thought strangest thing in the world. And look, it was at the time, I think probably to a lot of people, they'd be like, "Why the hell would you want that guy hosting the show?" I mean, I remember accidentally reading a couple of things, and I was like, "Oh, that was definitely the sentiment," and I understand the sentiment. I can understand where it came from. But yeah, going from doing Mike Hosking impersonations, and then later on when I got the job, driving into Mike Hosking. So I drove into his car park. So I took over his car park. I took over his computer. I took over his desk. This is the weirdest thing. I took over his locker in the TVNZ changing room, and it still had his name on it. So they hadn't printed my name at the stage. And so I had Mike Hosking's locker doing his old job, definitely not driving his car or his type of car. But inside his locker, this is quite good. Inside his locker was a Kenny Rogers album, like on vinyl,
right,
and a Bible.
Really?
Well, the two things that he had left, nothing else. Everything else had been cleaned out, no clothes, nothing else. But that was a Kenny Rogers album.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. I don't
And
even
Bible.
know. Is
And
that
the
on
Bible's
brand? I
gifted
don't know
to
if
him.
that's on brand.
I know. Well, that's maybe why he left it. He didn't want it.
On the way up, did you harbour ambitions of kind of doing genuine kind of current affairs and news? Because we'll touch on it, but the eating media lunch persona lent into that, and then you were doing it.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have to call 7 Sharp genuine current affairs and news, which I wouldn't call it firstly. It's more light infotainment, 7 Sharp. But no, I didn't like. You know what? I've never thought that I was going to be anything, and I've never been ambitious, and I've never had ideas that this is something that I want to do, or if I do this and this and this, it's going to lead to this, or anything like that. I've just kind of never been like that. The first job that I ever did in TV on the Havoc show, I didn't know that was going to happen. All of a sudden, that just sort of happened, and I was in that position, and then as a result, something else led on to something else, and I found myself in that position, and then it's been a just making decisions of yes or no when you get offered things over the years, and then you end up at the place that you end up. But I've never been very calculated in that way, and maybe that's just how I am, or maybe I'm just too stupid to be calculated. I'm not sure, but I've just kind of ended up at this point. It's quite accidental.
One of the most fascinating parts for me of your success is how you are the same person, but you're nailing both audiences. Because the audience, the chat you have with Matt in the morning on Radio Hauraki is very different to the persona you put forward for 7 Sharp. But it's the still base Jeremy, and you just kind of tailor it, right? Like, what's breakfast radio? What's the difference for you?
Well, breakfast radio is a lot of stories about you've got to bring a lot of your own life, and you've got to bring bits of yourself, because essentially nobody can see anything. So all they're hearing is what's coming out of your brain. So it's brain to mouth to microphone to ear, wherever someone's listening, which is quite a pure kind of a process. So you are creating everything that comes out of your brain and someone else's brain, and whatever is created from you too goes into people's ears. Television is about pictures. It's not about words. The words accompany the pictures, but it's mainly a visual thing, and you're stimulated by what you see. And it took me ages to work this out, but I mean, Country Calendar is a great example. Absolutely beautiful pictures. And what draws people to Country Calendar? You know, why is Country Calendar one of the most popular shows in New Zealand and has been for the last, 50 years? It's pictures. The pictures are just stunning. I mean, yeah, okay, the stories are interesting, but essentially it's the same rural story, isn't it? There's never it's never like at the end of the story they say, oh, and such something terrible's happened to them. It's like always just it's a rural story of people who take on a challenge, and then they go through the tribulations of that challenge, and then they end up at the end of the challenge. I mean, they've often not succeeded hugely or failed, or it's just they've gone through it. It's mainly pictures. Yeah. And so with TV, it's weird. It's what you see. And on something like 7 Sharp, most of 7 Sharp is stories, obviously. And then Hilary and I introducing the stories, and a little bit of chemistry from Hilary and I. But I'm not revealing much of myself on that show. And so you can hide on television, whereas on radio, I don't think you can hide in the same way. Radio, you can hear so much more than what you can see in someone's personality, if you know what I mean. With the way that you respond, the time that it takes you to respond to something reveals so much more about yourself. Whereas with TV, the visual part of it really, it's almost like it's a fog over people in terms of getting right through to someone.
Yet despite that, for people like me that do bookend their days with you, you're still able to sneak in some really nice Easter eggs into 7 Sharp. Like, yeah, I believe he does take cash. EFTPOS or cash. It was incredible last week. It really was. Is everybody in on that?
No, nobody's in on it. I mean, our executive producer would know. He knows what's going on because he listens to the radio.
Yes. And that target demo of me.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is Radio Hauraki. There's like a gag in Radio Hauraki, right? Try to slip some phrases into 7 Sharp.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it stemmed from years ago from the Scotty J. Stevenson word sneak, where we'd give Scotty J. Stevenson on Radio Hauraki on Friday mornings a word to try and sneak into a commentary because he was commentating rugby at the time. And that man was amazing.
Yeah, he was.
And because he would do it I'm just sort of plopping it into a place just before the last part of our show where we come out of an ad break and there's just a gap, so we can always put in anything in there. But he was genuinely, one day we gave him number 3 bag, as a euphemism for a condom. And he got it in there by this guy, Atu Morley, scored a try. And he said, and Atu Morley, and he goes, and the number 3 bags a try, because he was a prop. And I was like, he did that on the fly while he was commentating.
Yeah.
Like, it was super impressive. So anyway, it stemmed from that. And then if we thought, well, if we can shoehorn some words in, then, that'll make a segment.
There's one really viral clip, and I think you're talking about like extreme frisbee or something. You're like, and let's go see him toss off in the park.
Yeah.
And then Hillary's giving you the little side eye, and it's just like a little glance at Jeremy. But there's other ones where it seems she's in on it. And there was one you were talking about a cat. There's a segment about a cat, and it was like pussy problem and pussy this and pussy that. And then she's like, R.I.P. pussy, I guess. Which is
yeah. No, well, those ones are more. I think I got those. Some of them I've got in during intros and stuff like the we sent Reece Matthewson to toss off in the Queenstown Gardens. That one it seemed obvious, but otherwise it's quite hard often to shoehorn in bits into the intro. And the other thing is that I might write something in, and then Hillary will read it and she'll sub it, and she'll go, "Why the hell would you want to say that word in there?" And then she'll change it so it actually makes more sense, and so that'll be the end of that one. It's like, well, we've just got to say it at a different time.
But you do talk about that chemistry between you and Hillary, and it's incredible watching and viewing. But as you said earlier, you guys didn't know each other really before you started the show, so that's built organically over time.
Yeah, it has, and she, I love Hillary, and she's a wonderful person to work with. I feel very lucky. Lucky to work with both the main people that I work with in my life, and you have partnerships at certain times as a broadcaster, and it's an interesting area, chemistry, partnerships, because most of the time people are thrown together and they're not often even asked whether or not they should be thrown together. In Hillary's situation, I think she was the first person that they wanted for that job, and then I think you'd have to ask her, but I'm pretty sure she then suggested some people who she wouldn't mind working with, and I think I was one of those people. I think that's the way it worked. I'm not sure exactly, but so she did have a say, and I'm always surprised when I hear about presenters who are thrust into situations with other people who they don't know, and they don't even have a say on who that's going to be. Because ultimately, as you guys know, doing a podcast, like, chemistry is pretty much everything. And what is chemistry? It's a magic. It is this magic thing that happens, and you know when it happens. And it's actually, if you're totally honest about it, it is the reason why you broadcast. The magic is what you're looking for all the time. And if you are open to the magic happening, then these moments happen, and it feels so good when it happens. And you know when it's not happening, you're quite aware of it. And I reckon you get better over time of spotting when it occurs and when it doesn't.
Yeah, I think just before we move on, I'll talk about Matt Heath in this regard, because you guys have such great chemistry. He's the perfect foil. You guys are in such a routine now. You've been doing it for so long. But is he just the best to throw something to? Because you know he's just going to pick it up and run with it.
Seriously, Steve, it's impressive that you know that. That's exactly what the kind of person that he is. I always know if I'm going to say something, he will come in with something. He has something every single time. And that is such a great gift to work with someone like that. I can't imagine now, because Matt and I have been doing this show for 10 years, I can't imagine throwing something at someone and they just come back with nothing. That's absolutely terrifying.
Well, I did with Shay before, isn't it?
I think I scrambled
Suzanne Paul, mate.
No, you scrambled well there, Seamus. You did well. But yeah, that is a great gift to work with someone like that. And he is 100% like that, because there's a lot going on in that brain of his, like at all times. He can look at something very quickly and he can go down 3 angles. He's like, in his brain, each time you say something, there are 3 options for him to take. And it's interesting, you never quite know which one he's going to take. I don't know, but I know that there are always options. With some people, you might throw to, and I don't really, and haven't worked with people like this for a long time, luckily, but you would throw someone and they just look at you blankly and it's like, okay, well, I've got to pick it up again and go again.
Yeah.
And that's quite a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, his appeal seems to be he's genuinely interested in everything. It just
got an opinion on everything, or a reference to everything.
Authentic.
Yeah, well, look, and this is no secret. You know, he's super smart. His father's a professor. His mother was incredibly intelligent, and he is gifted with a large brain capable of storing huge amounts of information. He's got a lot of information in there, and he just, digests podcasts and reads stuff. Like, he just loves it, and he gets in on something and then he just goes deep. He needs to know, if he's going to be interested in something, he needs to know exactly how it started, why it's that. He's not interested in just kind of generally knowing about it. He needs to know more about it. He has to, otherwise he feels like he's not, either he knows everything about it or he knows nothing about it. That's kind of, he's pretty extreme dude.
Was that an arranged or an arranged relationship to get you onto Hauraki together?
It was actually, but it was something that so I knew him, I'd known Matt for quite a long time. I first met Matt in the 90s, late 90s, and he had come to Radio Hauraki off an amazing piece of luck. And luck, how interesting is luck? Luck is everything. I mean, it's why we are here. It's why we exist, all of us 3 people, and then the fact that we're now in this moment, crazy pieces of luck to lead to that moment. But luck for him was Ian Stables, and you've probably heard the story.
He was my neighbour in Hamilton.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was meant to be the drive show host on Radio Hauraki, and he was all signed up, ready to go. And then he had an unfortunate altercation with someone at an airport, and never quite made it to the first show. I mean, I think this was the Sunday before the first show on the Monday. Classic Stables. And so that was the end of that. So there was a very rushed call that was put through to Matt and said, look, would you mind doing a drive show? And Matt was like, really? Okay. So he started working at Radio Hauraki. And then over time, just all of his friends started working at Radio Hauraki, and I was one of those people. I must have come maybe a year after him or so. Started doing a Saturday show with Dr. Steve Simpson of the Auckland University Physics Department. So then when Martin Devlin stopped doing the Radio Hauraki breakfast with Laura McGoldrick, they thought, oh, maybe Matt and Jeremy could do it. And so we went through strange kind of go along to a recording studio and record a couple of breaks, and we talked about it and stuff like that. And then they thought, oh yeah, this is okay. And so we started doing the breakfast show.
Amazing sliding doors moment there with Stables. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. Oh, talk about luck.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if he hadn't have done that, whatever he did at that airport, God knows what the hell that man was up to. But if he hadn't have done that, then yeah, there's no doubt we never would have done the show together.
We have had the fortune of having a lot of successful people at the top of their field on the pod over the last few years. A lot of them talk about sacrifice or opportunity cost that comes along with it. And working breakfast and working at 7 o'clock means you don't get those important times with your family. And and I've heard you talk about this. Are you open to talking a little bit about how difficult it was to factor that into the whole scene?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity cost to not being at breakfast with your children, for 10 years, and then added onto that 7 sharp, and then not being there for dinner. Like, those are two quite important bits. And then obviously lunch. Well, I am at home. This is the thing. I'm home. Luckily Tulsi's at home with me for a lot of the time, so we get to spend a bit of time together, which is quite nice in the middle of the day. But in terms of the kids, no, definitely there's a massive opportunity cost there. But I was doing breakfast radio when the kids were in fact, I've been doing breakfast radio pretty much since Mishka, my daughter, she's now 13, so since she was 2 or 3. So she doesn't, and neither of my kids remember me ever being around during I didn't see when they first went to school and all of that sort of stuff. And I think you can get, if I really thought about it, and there are moments when their behaviour's not great, and I immediately blame myself and think, well, I wasn't there, I wasn't doing this. There is definitely an opportunity cost. I'm not sure what that is. It's time spent at meal times as a family, and I think you create a lot of culture during those times, and you set up things. I mean, my children, as a result, my children's table manners are just disgusting. Like, always talking to my partners like, oh man, because we always have dinner together on a Sunday night, and oftentimes lunches in the weekend too. And I'm just looking at what they can't even put their knife and fork together. It's like, I was brought up in a family where table manners were basically about 75% of my upbringing was focused on table manners. And then my children, and then if I then go out with my parents, I can see my dad looking across thinking, what have you done to these children? They're disgusting beings.
The knife and fork situation's a lost art to a lot of people. I think 2/3 of this conversation are very in tune with putting your knife and fork together when you finish a meal. And there's an outlier sitting amongst us that doesn't do that.
Really?
Wow, shall we have spoken about this?
Well, I've noticed
just an observation.
It's just an observation. Just an observation.
How dare you? You
Yeah.
don't put your knife and fork together. How does anyone know you've finished?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate. Maybe is that an old observation?
I don't know. You've changed. You're a father of 4 now. Maybe you've tidied your act up. But I definitely recall physically doing it for you. But this isn't the right. This isn't the right platform to air my dirty laundry.
Yeah, well, in my family growing up in the 80s, there was such a focus on table manners. I mean, my dad would sit at the other end of the table because I was the youngest, so it went, my dad at the end, I was at the other end, and it was against a wall, this table, so then my mum and my brother were sort of facing towards the wall on the long part of the table. And as a result, my dad just was focused on me the whole time down at the end, and he was so focused on manners, he was at a point where, with soup spoons, he was a scoop your soup backwards guy.
Yeah, you got to tilt the plate away.
And you always go away from yourself. You never so there we were like 5-year-olds going backwards with things, like breaking buns. You never cut your bun and oh man, the manners.
With the hectic Monday to Friday we've spoken about, and I'll move on soon, but when you're there with the weekend and you're there with your family, do you feel an extra sense of pressure or self-expectation to be really present? Like, do you detach from everything and go about your life that way?
Well, I don't do much on the weekend, so I don't go out partying with my friends or go and do things for myself or play multiple rounds of golf or anything like that. But I'm generally at home. But my kids now are not at home, so they're out. But I don't want to put pressure on my kids to say you must hang out with me because I feel guilty about the amount of time that I spend with you during the week. Because I think that would be unfair. But I think if you're present and you're around, what do you do when you're parent? You kind of look at your own childhood, don't you? And you think, okay, what worked, what didn't work? Where can I make changes here? And some people probably overcompensate in some areas, and they probably go too far. I remember my dad. My dad worked long hours, similar hours to me actually, except he wasn't at home in the middle of the day, and he travelled a lot. He was overseas a lot. A lot of the time, my mum would just be, be looking after us kids, and she was very capable. When he was in the weekend, he was around a lot, but in those days, I don't think people had much to do. But he was at home a lot, And so I kind of remember, I remember that, but he was not the kind of dad who was playing with me all the time. And I've never been the kind of dad who's out there constantly playing with their kids. If my daughter or my son say to me, do you want to go and do something? I'm like, yep, I'm into it. But I'm not kind of there forcing the issue. I don't know whether I think sometimes you're doing that for you. And I think as a parent, sometimes you've got to think about what you're doing for you and what you're doing for your children. And your children's life, and this is a great thing that I think when you realise as a parent, it really sets you free. Your children's lives aren't yours. And yes, you do have a massive influence of your children, of course. You brought them into the world, you bring them up, you do your best. But they only spend about 18 to 20 years with you. The rest of their life is spent by themselves. So really what you're doing is you're really equipping them to be by themselves and to make sure that they're going to be happy and they're going to be able to sustain themselves in their lives. And it's not about you. And you as a kid never love your parents as much as your parents love you. I think growing up you think, yeah, I love my parents, but then you don't realize until you have your own kids, it's like, no, you love your children so much more than you love your parents. And that's evolution. That has to be that way. So yeah, I kind of hope that how did I get onto this? I kind of hope that I want, Tulsi and I think we both agree on this. We want our children to be free to do what they want to do. And I don't want them to think I'm doing something to be, kind to my dad or good to my dad or anything like that. I'm like, don't worry about me. I'll be okay. You guys go out and do what you want to do. It's for you.
I'm keen to talk about your parents. You sort of mentioned your dad, Sir John Wells, helped set up what we know as Sport New Zealand, a merchant banker. And your mum, Lady Cheryl Wells, Silver Ferns manager for years. Your brother is a commercial lawyer. There's obviously, and with the career and
you've done
a
couple of things.
But I guess the question is there anything looking back that you can see foundation bricks that laid the path to the success? Like why were they such successful people, and what did you pick up from that?
It's weird. I never looked at my parents and thought that they were successful people. They were just my parents. And now I look back and I think, yeah, they were successful in their own fields. Like my mum was involved in netball, and she was manager of the netball team, New Zealand netball team, for a long time. And that kind of came later. That came in when I was sort of 15, 13, 14, something like that. But she was always involved in netball. My dad was not really involved in sport. He kind of just worked when I was growing up. But that's the thing with our family. We're all kind of my brother's things and my brother's things. I don't know. I was kind of doing my own thing. We all are quite different. We're similar, but we're all involved in different areas. And I'm happy about that. I wouldn't ever want to go into, my father's business that he ran was a merchant bank. And I didn't even know what a merchant bank was. And then I remember sort of in my 20s, I remember saying to my dad, something around friends whose kids went into their, family business or whatever. And I said, it was never an option for me. And then he said, why wasn't that an option for you? And I said, well, you didn't ever want me to go into the family business. He goes, I would have loved you to go into the family. But really? Firstly, you never even explained what you did. Secondly, I didn't even think that was, and he said, you could have been quite good at doing that. I thought I'd never even think that was ever an option. So, yeah, I think the family that you grew up was just whatever is your family is just your norm. And that was just kind of my norm. I think now I look back and my brother's done very well for himself in the legal world. And, yeah, it's kind of like, we've all just kind of gone our own ways.
Was there
anything that works for us?
Was there anything that upbringing that honed the incredible sense of humour that you do have? Like anything in and around the home, or did you just kind of pick that up on your journey as you went?
I don't know, and I don't consider myself that I have a great sense of humour, but I think I think the bits that probably shaped me into being what I am was having. I went to like a reasonably conservative, strict school from 5, which had quite strong rules around it. So you become quite good at finding the ridiculous, and a lot of it was ridiculous. A lot of for example, assembly I went to St Kent's Prep School in Remuera, and assembly was there was a teacher called Mr. Perry, and he must have been in the army or something. I don't know. He was this old guy. He was the deputy principal and the teacher of the top Form 2 class. And he used to stand and he would go, "School," at the beginning of the assemblies. You'd all be standing there. And he'd go, "School." We'd already be standing. He'd go, "School. Attention." And we'd have to stand up. So you'd stand with your feet apart. Everybody would be doing this. You'd be 5. I was 5. He'd go, "School." And then that was get ready. And then you go, "Attention." And at that point, you'd bring your right foot in towards your left foot. And then at that point, the headmaster would walk into the assembly. And you'd have to stand there straight. And then he'd go, "At ease." And then you'd be able to put your foot back to a wider stance. And then the headmaster, Mr. Irwin, would then say the school prayer, and then you'd be allowed to sit down. I was like, well, that is ridiculous. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. I just thought that was just how it was. But there was a lot of weird stuff that was going on. It was a strap. I mean, people were strapped, and I don't know. So I think probably, but it was weird, but it was also quite staunch, that culture. So it took quite a lot to push yourself up against it, and you knew that you couldn't break it because the structures around you were quite solid, but you definitely poked them, and it was a funny thing to be a part of, definitely.
Moving through the school years, and I've heard you talk about this a bit, so give it as much or as little detail as you want, but grew up in Auckland, and parents found marijuana in your room at 14. You got sent to Wanganui College, where you were expelled there for weed. And I've heard you describe it as the lowest point in your life. Give it as much or as little as you want, and perhaps what you learned from that period.
Well, yeah, it was a crazy time, and I, looking back on it, I feel like I was a different person, but I'm obviously the same person. But I was at school here in Auckland. I must have been at the end of year 11. What's that, fifth form?
Fifth form.
And it was a school holidays, and I was experimenting at the time with marijuana, as it seemed that most people I knew anyway of my age were, and my parents were reasonably conservative, and also they were very staunchly anti-drugs, and look, not anti-alcohol to a point, but certainly anti-getting wasted. Like, they always had alcohol in the house, and they always drank very moderately. They're very moderate people. They're not extreme people. And so I think my mother particularly would have been disappointed to think that I was interested in chasing some kind of experience through,
devil's lettuce.
Yeah, through drugs. Because she doesn't really understand why you'd want to do that. To her, that makes no sense. Why would you want to lose control, or why would you want to feel different? Whereas I thought, well, that's actually quite interesting. So anyway, they found some drugs in my room over the holidays, and then immediately within about, it felt like 2 or 3 days, it was coming towards the end of the holidays, I was at Wanganui Collegiate. I was in the headmaster's office, and I was, doing an interview to go to school down there, because I think my parents thought the problem is Auckland, obviously. There's drugs in this big city. Send them to Wanganui. There'll be no marijuana down there.
That was quite a prestigious school back then, wasn't it? Wanganui Collegiate.
Yeah, it's a very traditional school.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very old. I think it was set up in the 1860s or something, and it was based very much around an English public school. And so anyway, I went down there for a year. That was all good. And I enjoyed it. I made good friends, went to boarding school. It seems odd that I sort of just took it in my stride at the time. I thought, oh, yeah, okay, this is what's happening. I'll try and make the best of this situation. It's not really where I wanted to go, but I thought, well, what choice do I have? So I was down there, and then at the end of the year, you get to choose a week experience at the end. Once you've done all your exams and all that sort of stuff, in sixth form, there's this period of time in those days where you had nothing to do.
Yeah,
do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that. And I didn't have anything, and I did Kung Fu at school with Mr. Pinkerton. It's a real Hamilton Boys reference out there, which will get a lol from people. Well, I do remember that really vividly.
Yeah, because you finished in like November or something. It was weird, and there was just this period of purgatory where nothing good came of that period. It's just like, what a 16-year-old's going to do when they've got nothing to do? Well, something bad. So anyway, they at school, instead of sending you home, they sent you away at boarding school to Wanganui Collegiate to a community experience week. And you could choose different things. My choices were, I remember, an old person's a retirement village, and you stay there for a week.
On site?
Yeah, you stay at a motel. Or I think, and that one was in Wanganui, so I think we stayed at school, and they drive you with the school bus there. There was Lake Alice, was in those days they were called mental hospitals. They're not, obviously they don't even exist anymore, but that was what they were called in those days. Like a institution, a psychiatric ward, yeah. And then another option, there were other options, and then another option was the NSAD Drug Treatment Centre in Martin, which I thought to myself, well, of all the options here, I can kind of, this is kind of interesting to me. I thought this will be interesting. Whereas, the other, I'd heard terrible stories about what happened at Lake Alice, and I didn't really want to be dealing with old people. So there I was. And then before I went along there, we were staying in a motel because it was in Martin, and the school's in Wanganui. And I was like, yes, finally teachers are not looking. We can do whatever we want. And I knew that we were working during the day, and then you'd cook your own meals at night and then just hang out in the motel at night. And I was like, no teacher with us, all good. So I thought, now's a good time to, and I'd spent the whole year, I hadn't smoked pot all year. I'd been good. And because I'd sort of promised my parents that I'd try my hardest. And it'd been a good year. And then so I thought, I'll treat myself here, finish my exams. And I won't get in any trouble for this. So then, anyway, got a cap of hash oil or cannabis oil, and then went away there, and then worked away for a few days, and met a whole lot of good people. It was really interesting. I was enjoying it, actually, and then having interesting conversations with people. And then I hadn't smoked any of the cannabis oil at this stage. Just sort of waiting for an opportunity at night, and it hadn't presented itself. And then one of the patients there came up to me just before I was going to leave, or probably on the third day, and said, I heard you've got some drugs. And I said, no. And then they said, well, that's not what one of the other guys who was here said. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's not true. And then sort of described what I had and where it was and all sorts of things. And at that point I was like, oh, this is not good. I found myself in a kind of a difficult situation, and he was reasonably coercive, and I didn't have the skills to negotiate my way through it as well as I would have liked. And in the end, I ended up giving it to him, and not, which is a terrible idea, and that sounds like the worst thing in the world. But I didn't want any money for it. It wasn't. In the end, I actually threw it on the ground, and I said, if you want to pick it up, that's all good, because I felt like I didn't really have an option. And he did. He just picked it up, and then he had it. I think he swallowed it, I assume, because the next day when I came in, it was. So I went home that night thinking, that was a mistake. This is bad.
Because you were 16, 17.
Yeah, I was 16, into sixth form. And I knew that what I'd done was wrong, but I just felt like I didn't really have any other option, even though I did have an option. The thing is, he also was saying, I'm going to tell the people anyway, and I was like, fucked here. So he then swallowed it, then came back the next day, and people just shaking their heads, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I saw him, and he was like, he was really stoned. Is what he was. He just had red eyes. And a stoned person at a sober really rehab facility, boy, do they stand out. And then we had the family meeting, and then they stood up, and they made me stand up, and then they said, Jeremy, what have you done? And I told them what had happened, and then just, one by one, people just stood up and just laid into me. I remember just standing there in tears. It was pretty brutal, but fair enough. I take, I was like, well, this is fair enough. And then the guy called me into the main office and said, who was in charge of the facility, and said, this is obviously not an ideal situation. I said, no, I know. And then he said, I've got to tell the school. I said, yeah, I understand that. And then he said, don't worry, I'll talk to the school, and I'm sure they'll understand these drug addicts, because this person, everyone was called an addict, even though this guy probably was just trying to get off a lighter sentence because he had said that he was a drug, I assume, and you go to a rehab facility for 6 months and you get a lighter sentence. But but everyone was considered an addict, even if they smoked marijuana in those days. So he was like, these addicts can be, very persuasive and all that sort of stuff. So the deputy headmaster came and then picked me up and then drove me back. They put me in solitary confinement at the school. Then they went through my study and looking for drugs and all sorts of stuff. And I was being treated like I sort of deserved to be, really, which is essentially a criminal. And marijuana at that stage was illegal. And I think even cannabis oil may be like class B or something, who knows. And then my parents came down because they were, I was going to be expelled, so they came down, and then I remember walking into the headmaster's office. There's my parents, there's a headmaster, very traditional old room. My parents just, I've never seen such, disappointment. And then, I got expelled, and then my parents then had said to me before I left, this is your last chance, because before they'd sent me down to Wanganui, we'd been having some problems. And then they said, this is your last chance, and if you muck this one up, that's it. You're not part of this family anymore. And I was like, whew, okay. But I thought, I won't muck it up. I'll be okay. And so at that point, when we walked out of the headmaster's office, my parents were like, oh, well, we told you what we told you, and see you later. And they just drove off. And so I was just left in Wanganui by myself, standing outside the headmaster's office. They've gone, and then I go back to the sanatorium where I've been staying, which is like the hospital thing, solitary confinement. I was getting my meals brought to me like a prisoner. And then that night I got put on the Northerner train back to Auckland and ended up going and staying with a friend of mine for a few months. And so that was it for me. That was my expulsion. And my parents practicing, I guess, what they thought was tough love back in those days. A pretty brutal maneuver by them, but I got to say, quite good, because if that hadn't have happened, I don't think anything else I think a whole lot of other things would have happened that all worked out quite well in the end.
Yeah, bold strategy.
Yeah,
bold strategy, which has paid off.
Big call from my parents. My parents are pretty tough people, They at their heart, and also they're very principled. And I think they thought, well, we said this, and we have to follow through with it now. But I mean, you'd never do that now, would you?
No.
I mean, I wouldn't do that to my kids. But look, in the end, it was probably the right thing to do. Well, it was the right thing to do.
Well, thank you for sharing it. There's one point I just want to kind of go back on as well, as just for clarity's sake, that trip home on the Northerner after you were expelled, is that a different trip to the trip on the Northerner, which I referred to earlier, which is the story of you losing your virginity? I just want to make, just for clarity's sake, that they're two different Northerner trips.
Totally different Northerner trip. I made 3 trips on the Northerner in my year at Wanganui
Two
Collegiate.
very memorable. For very different reasons.
Both, yeah, there were 2. You're right, there were 2 very memorable ones and one that I can't remember anything about. In fact, was there? I think there may have only even been 2. They were both very memorable. Yeah, I lost my virginity on one, and the other one was a different feeling altogether. I remember going home, and I remember being on this train, and I thought, God, this is a disaster. What are you? I never thought that I was going to be a person who'd be expelled from a school. I just wasn't that type of person. Okay, I pushed the boundaries at certain times, but I was never I was not an expulsion. Like in those days, getting expelled was
a big deal.
Oh man, it was a big deal. Because, before that we had canings and all sorts of stuff. But being expelled, that means you're a bad person. That means you're a bad, bad person. And, I just remember there were a couple of incidents there. And definitely, I used to smoke in those days. And I remember being up the front of the area where you smoke. And it was nighttime because it left at 11 o'clock at Martin. So you go through the night. And I remember thinking, what do you do in this situation? I thought, I think you're meant to kill yourself. And I just thought, I think that's what I'm meant to do. That would be the honourable thing to do in this situation. You brought such shame to your family. And luckily, I just didn't have the guts to do that. But I mean, looking back on it, that was a moment. I just would never have the guts to be able to do something like that. But it's definitely a thought that I had.
Yeah, well, thank God you pushed through, because so many people do have those thoughts and take the other path.
Yeah, well, luckily for me, I wasn't a case of so much. As I said, it wasn't. It was just a thought, but that was it. It was not something that was really an option for me. luckily.
So life is in disarray. There's only one thing to straighten you out, and that's a little trip back down to Hamilton, and that's a year at St. Paul's. Now, you probably don't know this, but we're proud ambassadors. We're both from Hamilton. We've got this movement going, people really proud to be from Hamilton, proud of the city, and it seemed like it straightened you out.
Oh, it was a good school, and it was a good time, and I met great people. I met ACC head G Lane there. He was in my team, cricket team. I met great friends. It was a much less strict school, St. Paul's in Hamilton, and the headmaster there as well, Steve Cole, understood boys and had I think he'd done a few things himself, and so he realised how boys think, and I think he spotted a kindred spirit in me. I've seen him recently actually, and he was very good to me, I've got to say. He did say to me when I went to the interview to go back to school, because eventually I ended up reconciling with my parents after a couple of months. And then they said, look, you've got to go back to boarding school, otherwise you can't be part of this family. I was like, oh, okay, here we go again. So I'm driving down to Hamilton. And he said to me, Steve Cole was like, Jeremy, normally, because he spoke like Graham Henry, normally I would give people 2 or 3 chances. If they did something wrong at the school, for you get no chances. You do one thing wrong and you are out that door quick as a flash. And I remember that was the thing he said to me in the interview. But then luckily nothing bad happened.
So he didn't see you stoned on the roller doing the cricket
He never caught me
fits.
doing anything. He didn't want to catch you doing anything. Actually, that was the difference between that school and Wanganui. Wanganui, they wanted to catch you doing bad things. Like they knew that people were out there doing bad things, and they wanted to find them. Whereas St. Paul's, they knew that you were doing bad things, but they did not want to find them. They were like,
"It's Hamilton, baby."
Yeah.
If it doesn't hit us in the face, we'll just let it slide. And I was super lucky as well. I had a housemaster there called Paul Wilson who, geez, he was a nice man. And he was a classic example of like, if everyone's nice and everyone's getting along, I'm not going to go looking for problems here. And as a result, everybody got on better, and he just gave you a little bit more rope, and things were just a bit easier. Because it's quite hard being at boarding school. Where do you experiment with all of these things? Where are you meant to be a teenager? At school the whole time? It's hard to do.
Before we move into the Havo days, claim to fame has been wedged between Dan Vittori on the St. Paul's Honours Board. Was that for a fifer?
Yeah, that's right. That's my proudest moment. I got 5 wickets against Hamilton Boys High in 1994 in a Gillette Cup match.
Wow.
Yeah, 6 for 24, and we bowled them out for 108, and got into the Gillette Cup semi-final as a result of that. That's my greatest moment in life. There's no doubt about that. Everything was coming together that day in front of the school. I think I was embarrassingly, in those days, I'd celebrate wickets a little bit too much, and I think at the time Ian Botham was doing some weird kind of dance where he'd stick his fingers up in the air and sort of shake his bum. And I remember at the end of it, my mum came down to watch, and at the end she goes, oh, you bowled well today, but did you have to do that dance every time you got a wicket? It's like, yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Do you ever go to any old collegiate events? Do you ever roll into Hamilton these days? Can we count on your support as a ambassador is basically what I'm saying.
Look, I had a great time in Hamilton, and I will always remember the wonderful hospitality that was shown to me in the Waikato in 1994. I'll never forget that.
Very good.
And the good-natured vibe in the Waikato, and also the fact that in the Waikato, drinking is just it's quite impressive the way that, I mean, at our school we had alcohol at our ball. I mean, how many balls?
Yeah, I went to a St. Paul's after ball once. I ended up in Taupo. It was a hell of a night.
Hold on, the alcohol at the after ball, but at the actual ball, I mean, who turns up?
Yeah.
And we've got drink tickets, and you're allowed 5 drinks. I mean,
Really?
yeah, 5. We're allowed 5 drinks.
Standards.
Yeah, like beer or wine.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Amazing.
That was a good time.
Yeah. Sounds like we've got him. Ambassador.
Yeah,
Put him
we
on
definitely-
our
happy.
list.
Definitely.
All right, I'm going to move us along. So you finish high school, the high school years, we get through it. Drop out of AIT, and a day after dropping out of the journalism course for missing classes, Wells was invited to co-host the first episode of Havoc. Is that the timeline
Is
that
that
as you remember
factual as well? Because sometimes these exact time frames get stretched.
No, that was it. That was I think if I remember rightly, and you know, sometimes you create these stories in your mind, and then, but I'm pretty sure what happened was I was in my last year. I was in the last term of the last year. So I was. It was divided into 2 semesters in those days for some reason. I was in the second half, and I hadn't gone to a whole lot of lectures in the morning, and it meant you didn't get terms requirements to sit an exam. And so I wasn't allowed to sit the exam. And I remember the head of communications at the time called me and said, you can't sit the exam because you haven't gone to these lectures, you haven't got your terms requirement. And I was reading the news at BFM at that stage, and I was reading the breakfast news with Mikey Havoc, and it was on at the same time as a lecture or something like that. And I thought to myself, this seems a bit unusual because I'm actually doing, some kind of the same sort of thing that we're meant to be studying here. I'm actually doing it in the world. And I did say that to the head of communications at the time, but she was like, no, that doesn't really work like that. That's not part of the requirement. So she said, sorry. I remember being quite upset about that. I was pretty gutted because I would have liked to have at least been able to sit the exam, and that meant that I would have had to come back for another year at the end of that. And not that I was doing well in that course anyway, to be fair. I think C's get degrees, and I think I was just getting that. I was mainly focused on going out.
So you're reading the news for Mikey. We've had him on the show. He's one of the most charismatic people. You're a very charismatic person, but Mikey Havoc, in his prime, in his pomp, just seemed to have this electric energy. Did you gravitate to that straight away? Did he have an aura around him from the first time you met?
Oh my God, did he ever? Like, on another level. And at the time, definitely the funniest, most charismatic, sharpest, considered person that I'd ever met in my life, and so worldly, and had such interesting opinions on things. And I mean, I must have been maybe 19 or something when I met him. And he was very hospitable to me, and really welcomed me in. And it was such a great time of my life when I first met him. And I can't explain to you how that guy, if he was in a room, there was nobody else, there was nobody else you would want to give a room energy. He had an energy that was unmatched. And look, a lot of people would say that that may have come from different reasons, but it wasn't. It came from inside of him. He was amazing. He was the best company you could ever imagine. What would it, if you go and hang out with other people after you've hung out with him, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like going from drinking absinthe to a water or something. Like he has an amazing energy about him.
The story I'd heard about how Havoc started was that he met Neil Roberts at a nightclub and kind of charmed him and won him over, and then he decided to give him a show.
How about a show?
He did. That's exactly what happened. And I remember him coming into radio on the Monday morning or maybe the Tuesday, and where I was doing the breakfast, and he goes, "God, this craziest thing happened in the weekend." Because I think it was at a place called the Staircase, which was like a bar on a nightclub on K Road. It was mainly a gay club that did dance parties and stuff. And I remember him coming in and saying, like, I met the head of TVNZ on Saturday night, and there we are, dancing away. And he said to me, I've just bought MTV, and I bought the rights for MTV Europe and New Zealand. And he goes, I need local content. Would you be interested in doing a show? And Mikey's like, yeah. He goes, I said, what did you say to him? He goes, of course. I said, yes, of course. He goes, and I've got to get a prop to him by the end of the week. And so that was how that was born. And I think then Mikey went away and came up with a whole lot of crazy ideas that he'd always wanted to do. And the other thing with Mikey, he knew how to use language amazingly, and he could paint superb visual pictures on radio. But what people didn't see was he also was very visual, with things that he'd do. And he was doing sketches to friends all the time. Like the things that he would do, he was always acting and being funny. And he loved using props, and he was an incredibly creative guy. And so I thought, and TV was made for him, so then he put that prop in, and then Neil Roberts, I think, said yes.
How quickly into it did you realise that it was something pretty special? Because it was so new on TV screens in the late 90s.
Well, there was you have to look around at what else was on at the time, and I think our show was a reaction to what else was on. And Mikey's probably told you about this, but it was there's a lot. Things were very safe on New Zealand television in the late 90s, and we would I think probably previous to the kinds of things that we were doing in terms of the tone, probably the only other thing that was around before us was probably Marcus Lush's segments on Newsnight, which had the same kind of sensibility as things that we were doing. Marcus Lush also coming from BFM, Paul Casserly being the director of Marcus Lush's segments on Newsnight. But I remember watching Newsnight as a kid. It was a TV2 news show with Ellie Moore, used to host it, and before that Simon Dello and Ellie Moore, and Laurelie Mason at certain times as well. But anyway, Marcus would sit there, and then at the end you would just wait for Marcus's story at the end, because he'd go to inorganic rubbish collections and just walk around and talk, and he was so funny and absurd, and that was kind of, you didn't see a lot of that on TV. It was all pretty straight down the line and heavily manufactured. So I think when we first started Havoc, there was not a lot of weird stuff going on, and Mikey was a surrealist, you know, in the greatest sense of it, and so it was just really about putting Mike's surreal brain and putting pictures to it, really. And I think Neil was smart to be able to work that out. And I remember having a couple of conversations with Neil before he died, because he died very young, Neil, probably in his 50s, early 50s, I think, of cancer. And him talking about Mikey, and Neil had a huge admiration for him and his creativity. And yeah, so Neil could spot it straight away, and good on Neil.
But so could Mikey. He talked about you on the show, because originally you were on and you were kind of going to be a bit of a silent guy who might chip in every now and then. And me and Shay watched back that first episode the other night with the blonde of blowout hair, and you know, it was very Havoc, but it was a bit awkward, and you were doing the soda machines. And then as the seasons were on, your role became more and more, and you really fell into this character. So he's seen something in it. What were you, 1920?
Yeah, I think I was 19 or 20. Yeah. But I think I did start as a researcher. I was going to be a researcher on that show. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to. There's no Google in those days. So what was I meant to do? Go to the library? I think I did go to the library a couple of times, maybe in the first couple of weeks. I can't remember. Well, maybe the first couple of days anyway. But then it kind of evolved. But I think we knew that we kind of had a chemistry anyway from radio, so there was something there. And then it essentially evolved, and it was allowed to evolve because there was no pressure. I mean, you could do whatever you want. You could, take a shit in the corner of the room, and that would be something. I remember one day we decided that we were going to trash our set. Mike probably talked about that, and we actually took to the set with sledgehammers. Like, this is a set that's made, using TVNZ budget, and we were listening to I think it was Rage Against the Machine video, because we used to play like 2 videos a show. And we just started smashing up the set because it just kind of felt right. And we walked out that night thinking, yep, nothing unusual about that. And I mean, the people who made the set must have been like, you assholes. What did you do that for? There's nothing about that. It was just kind of, just that kind of anarchy. And then also Paul Casserly met Mikey at that stage. And that was a great creative relationship in terms of that show. And I'm sure Mike probably talked about that. But Paul had, as I said, worked with Marcus. Paul was also station manager at BFM for a long time. The alternative culture in those days was quite strong, and there was a real difference between alternative and mainstream, and we were very much in the alternative camp, and we saw ourselves very much as outsiders, and we liked being outsiders, and Paul was an outsider, and Mikey was an outsider, but even though they had quite different brains, together Paul could make the things, Mikey's ideas, he could make them into television ideas. And those two had a very strong relationship.
I think you solidified your alt status when someone nailed their penis to a crucifix.
Oh, yeah.
That was... Don't watch
and
it.
And then caught it on fire.
I wasn't sure about that detail, yeah.
Yeah, no, they lit it on fire.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Well, in those days as well, we were looking for the worst thing possible. So the whole thing was like, what is the worst thing that we could do on TV?
It's up there.
And that was right up there. But someone sent that into us, because they obviously got kind of the sensibility of the show. But I just remember thinking my brain process was very much, what has never been done on TV before, we must do it. That was kind of where we were at.
It's funny thinking back, like, you know how disjointed your memory can be and unreliable, a lot of those Havoc episodes live on. And I went searching for one of them, the Live Eye, with the where you're wearing the thing and you're going in with a prostitute, and it's like the state of the art technology TVNZ have got. You've somehow got a hold of it, and this whole scene has kind of played out. There's no sex involved, but I went looking for it, but I couldn't find it. But it was a really it was a clip that I kept referencing for maybe 10, 15 years afterwards, because there was that conversation. It's like, so how about them Warriors?
Does that not exist?
I couldn't find it anywhere.
Oh, thank God for that. But that's a good story, because we, at the time, there was prostitution law reform which was going on. And at the time, I think prostitution had been decriminalised in New Zealand. And so that was a topic du jour. Let's get our teeth into the topic du jour, which is this issue. Because nobody else would have been touching it. It would have been one of those things. And I remember Mike and I sitting down and saying, okay, what do we do? And I remember saying, well, one of us has to have sex with a prostitute. It's just, of course. And he's like, yeah, okay. And then,
yeah, you're right.
And then we're like, how are we going to do that? And then at the time, we were involved, because we worked at TVNZ as part of TVNZ. We had access to the news library, and Paul Casserly used to just take images out of the news library, and so that was, and then create news stories out of it, and I'd voice them, and we had access to all of the things at TVNZ, like everything, and quite a large budget, stupidly, and so we then asked Paul Cutler, who was the head of News and Current Affairs, do you mind if we borrow the Live Eye? We're filming a segment. He was like, okay. Like, they didn't even ask what for. And so we hiked it up outside of a brothel. And then we went into the brothel, and then I went in with a cricket helmet with a handy cam stuck to this gaffer tape.
That's right.
And Mike was inside the Live Eye guiding me. We did a paper, rock, scissors before that, who was going to have sex with a prostitute.
So
and I don't know whether I won or lost. I can't remember, but it was me. And then Mike was like, it's going to be okay, mate. And then it was me on the phone. The segment before was me on the phone to my partner at the time saying, yeah, I've got to have sex with a prostitute, like explaining to her. And then, anyway, I ended up going in there, and I didn't actually have sex with her. I was kind of pretending, and she was a prostitute. That was a sex worker. That was true. But then, so there I am doing that, and then I think I put a picture of the News Talk ZB radio lineup up in front of me, just in case I needed, in case things went on for some time. And I've got Mike in the Live Eye who's directing me, just giving me tips on what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. And then then in the end, I think I ended up zooming into Murray Deaker's face upon climax. But the funniest thing about that was we did the show, and that was all fine. My mother at the time was the manager of the New Zealand netball team, and she was on camp in Auckland before they went away to the World Games. And she never watched that show, thank God. She never watched any of our Havoc shows. She knew that it was just best that she didn't watch it. But that night, the girls in the netball team, Bernice Menny was the person who said to my mum, come on, Ducky was her name, come on, Ducky, let's watch Jeremy's TV show. My mum's like, no, it's fine. And the girls were like, no, come on, we'll all sit down. And so the entire New Zealand netball team, of all the days that they would choose to watch the Havoc show with my mum, was that episode. And so they sat down and watched that. Now, can you imagine my mum? She's watching me pretend to have sex with a sex worker, with all that sort of stuff, and then the Murray Deaker thing at the end. And she has never, ever mentioned to me that she ever watched it. She's never told me the story. The only Bernice Menny was the one that told me the story about 10 years later. And I thought, oh, my poor mum having to watch me do that.
Poor Lady Cheryl.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm pleased that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, we'll go looking for it again. So as this sort of snowball is building, and the show is so popular, and it's you and Mikey, you're such recognisable characters. Like we talked about, now there's so many different avenues for people to watch. Then it was like 3 channels and everyone was watching the show. When you went out touring around together, was there hysteria? Was it people lining up in the streets to see you guys?
Yeah, there were, because I think New Zealand was quite a different place in those days. There was no social media. There was no internet. There were, in some parts of the country, one channel, like for example the West Coast of the South Island, they didn't have a TV2, let alone TV3. So it was a different cultural landscape in those days. And TV, people who are on TV were kind of novelties. You know, nowadays it's like, oh yeah, whatever. But then it was something different. And people didn't see you or hear from you very often. So I think people wanted to know more. So they wanted to see what you were like. They wanted to see you in the flesh. So yeah, when we'd do our sellout tours, we'd go places, and it was early days of cell phones. And so people would text other people to say, oh, you know, Havoc and Newsboy are filming something in the main street of, you know, Westport or something. And next thing you know, there'd be like, heaps of people who come down just to kind of stare at you and sort of see whether you're real. But it was quite a different time. I mean, nowadays, I think now if I go to a town or a supermarket or stuff, people will look at you, definitely. But it's not the same as what it was in those days. It was a completely different vibe. But social media means that people get you the whole time. They can get you. They can basically communicate. They can DM you if they want to, and you DM back. So yeah, it's a different. There was a distance in those days.
Do you look back? Are you the sort of person that looks back when you look back on Havoc and Newsboy? Is that something you're proud of? Do you look back and are you really happy with the work you did?
No, no, I'm not. And I don't look back. No. And I do occasionally, if I'm doing something like this, I'll think about it. But before that, I don't really have any thoughts about it. And I mean, I'm not. It is what it is. It was something that I did, and I can't. It's like the fact that I gave, you know, a cap of cannabis oil to a recovering drug addict. It's like that is something that I did. I can't take that back now. And it is what it is. It's probably not the best thing to do. And if I would do it again, only because if I didn't do it again, who knows what would have happened. But it's not something that I'm proud of. And so I don't know. I don't look back on things and go, you know, I'm particularly proud of this or particularly proud of that. I can't think of anything that I'm particularly proud of.
Is it the same with Eating Media Lunch and the Unauthorized History of New Zealand? Do those two pieces of work as well kind of sit in that space?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I am proud of, and if I'm honest, I'm proud of the team that, like, I'm proud of the partnership that I created along with Mikey to make the sellout tours, and I'm proud of the part that I played in the Havoc show and being a part of that team. I'm proud of the teams that I've been involved in, but my own kind of performance inside of that, I don't want to watch that stuff again. I'm not really interested. There's a memory of it in my head, and it happened, and I have weird memories of stuff from the past, but I don't want to go back over and relive the gold. You know, like I don't think it was gold myself, but I was definitely proud to be a part of the team. And when people come up to me and say that they enjoyed certain parts of it or something like that, that makes me feel good. But yeah, it's not something that I really go over or anything like that.
Well, Targeting Target is one of my all-time favourites.
Yeah, well, that was a great...
Just for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, that was a great performance from Ed Cake. And he's a musician, Ed Cake, from Bresicreting Cake. And yeah, he's stomping around. And the bit where the heck I'm a pussy. Yeah. His lines in that, because that was he ad-libbed all of that stuff.
Wow,
it's just so good.
It's an incredible performance.
He bought something completely so bizarre.
Is that the one where he's glad wrapping himself and he takes a shit on the pot? On the
yeah, that was never part of the script. Any of that was never part of the original idea. That was just Ed. And the stomping bit, like there's this bit where he's stomping around. That guy is a genius. He's incredibly clever. I mean, great musician and just so unusual.
I won't keep you too much longer, but I'll just move you along. I do want to talk about the ACC because you're such an integral part of its beginning and where it's come to now. And the cricket commentaries, like when you had the caravan and you're on the sideline of the games and it was you and Jace Hoyt and Mike Lane and the crew and Lee Hard all together, like there was such a magic happening. And I think a lot of it came down to your expertise in calling the game, so it sounded like a real cricket commentary, and then just the absolute sort of nonsense, the
filth around it.
Yeah,
but the ball by ball it's an incredible combination.
Yeah, funny. Well, thank you. It's a funny thing because it was originally it was a parody. I mean, like most of the things I do, including what I do on 7 Sharp now, is a parody of someone doing it. You know, I'm pretending to be someone, and that's kind of how I have to do it. I'm not really that. And I'm not really a cricket commentator. I'm not really a television host. I'm just someone pretending to be a television host. I'm not really a radio host. It's just all a parody of it, of those people. And I think with the ACC, when G Lane and I first started talking about it, we were very clear that it needed to still be cricket commentary, even if it was a parody of that. But that bit of it was a crucial part to it working. It wasn't just some friends standing around crapping on. And so when we made that rule, and thank goodness that we made it really, really clear from the start that no matter what happened, everything had to stop. As soon as the bowler was about to bowl, that's when the ball-by-ball person took over. And also, someone had told us that that's how commentary teams worked. Like, we didn't really know because we'd never been in a commentary box before. Someone said, like, there's a ball-by-ball person, there's a comments person. It's like, okay, that makes sense. But that is the ACC and cricket commentary particularly is something I'm super proud of. And I'm very proud of, again, the team of people that G Lane and I put together, because Lee Hart and G Lane they didn't really know each other particularly well, and Matt didn't know Lee Baker, and Paul Ford didn't know Lee Hart, or like none of these people. The connection was really through G Lane and I. And in my head, it was just like, okay, who has the same sensibility as us and the same idea of the absurd and knows something about cricket, and was also a person who is a generous person who can listen and then take it somewhere interesting. And so, and after the first commentary in Napier that day, I thought to myself, immediately I went, yeah, this is. I knew immediately that was going to work. I was like, this is something here. We've got something.
Was that after Guess the Commentator's perineum?
No, that was later on. That was in the World Cup. I thought the one where we each one of the commentators shared their ejaculate onto a
milk of the Jap side.
I thought that's good. Like, looking back on it, I'm actually quite proud of that. Because that's going into an area nobody can ever go down there again, where that's 100% a first in world commentary, and nobody can ever take that away from us. We are definitely the first commentary team to all ejaculate onto a tissue and then to run a competition of whose ejaculate is whose.
Yeah,
like that is that.
You'll go to your grave with that.
I'm proud of that. I am proud of that.
If you're this far through the episode, go back and you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to Mike Lane's ep, because he tells an amazing story about the most disgusting story ever told on the ACC. I think it involves a businessman's sock, and it might have been you telling it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
we don't need to go over that ground.
The weird thing about the ACC and where we went, we never planned on going. We never said, okay, we're going to make the worst. We're going to say the worst things it could possibly say. Like, nobody ever planned that. It just always ended up descending. And because there was no censorship rule, and because we were on the internet, there were no broadcasting standards. We could go anywhere, which was just so freeing. And that's why we ended up going. We never planned on going to any of these places, but it was a place that you just realised you could just let the dogs off the leash and just see what happened. And it's very liberating, that.
What the ACC has become, it's branched out. You know, it's live events now, it's commentaries, it's a suite of podcasts. Are you involved in the vision of what you want it to be, or are you sort of hands off and Lane sort of takes care of that?
Well, I'm pretty hands off, and it would be kind of, I mean, I still chuck my oar in where I think that I should chuck my oar in, but in terms of the day-to-day running and how it all works, that is G Lane, and G Lane is amazing at moving things forward, and he has the ability to have about 7 or 8 balls in the air at any given time, and you would never even know that he's juggling all of these things. It's just like each thing seems that he's got 100% attention on. And meanwhile, I've never met anyone who's got that mental agility before. You know, it's pretty amazing. And he can also go very much from that creative part of his brain into an administrative world. He can walk over that bridge very, very easily. Most people struggle with that, but he can deal with all of that stuff really, really easily. But in my mind, I like where it's going because I think it has to expand. And I just love the idea, this main sentiment, which will always be with the ACC, which is entertainment and making sports, and whatever else we end up covering entertaining. And that's the main part of it, because I think that was the thing where we started. That was the bit that was just missing, some kind of entertainment aspect to it.
We've been to a lot of places. I just want to touch on the late night big breakfast. Was that, for all of the things you've done, was that one of your most enjoyable pieces to put together? Because it seems, despite your deadpan delivery on 90% of what you do, to be an incredibly fun environment of just chaos as well.
Great to be a part of that, because I was sitting beside Lee Hart and Jason Hoyt, and to be part of that dynamic and the chemistry between those two, because they have a great chemistry, and just to watch how that works. I mean, what I think you can see when you watch, I'm most of the time bewildered. It is because I didn't know what was happening, and no one knows what's going on in Lee's brain. Like, I think Lee totally knows what's going on in his brain. He's well aware of. He's actually very organised inside of his head, but it does not seem like that from the outside, which is brilliant. And to watch him and Jace interact, and I was like, I would always be thinking, do they know what they're doing here? Like, is this a plan? I didn't even know. I just sort of turn up for a couple of hours and shoot it, and then go home. So when I watched the final product, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is not what I thought it was going to be, and yeah, Lee, not only is he an amazing live performer, Lee, but then when he's actually cutting things together and the stuff that he does post-production, he's very, very clever.
I remember watching Olympico. This dates me a little bit, but I sent that to so many people. It's like, you need to watch Olympico. And it was you, Jason, Lee, and you had like Daniel Loader and things like that. And that was kind of the basis, I think, of Big Breakfast. But that same dynamic.
Yeah, it was. That was the basis.
It just worked.
Filmed in a car park in a caravan again. I think it was a camper van, that one.
Yeah.
I think it was a camper.
It's a camper.
It's when you break character is the funniest parts that I find, is like when Mike the Mongolian throat singer is on and you're in tears. It's there's all sorts of little, if you watch closely you can see the parts where people break. I think Lee must deliberately leave them in the cut because they're so good.
Yeah, well, that actually was the only time I'd seen Lee break character. Like, he doesn't break character ever. And him and Jace is quite good at holding it in, but the reason that I'm laughing so hard in that Mike the Mongolian throat singer is because I saw Lee break, and he never breaks. And so when someone like that starts laughing, it's like, that was a great joy, that Mike the Mongolian throat singer. Man. Yeah, but that's that thing that we were talking about earlier, which is that magic thing. Is like, what is that? It's hard to say exactly what it is, but that is, I reckon, that is why and I'm not sure about other people broadcast, but that is why I do what I do, is for those moments that are elevated, that are magic moments. They come from somewhere and they're different. They're different than when you hang out with your friends, because it's you're being filmed and all that sort of stuff. But there's something those are the best moments of your life as a broadcaster.
I'm going to start to wrap us up. I had a bunch of big questions at the end. We've actually worked our way through them through the episode, but there's one that I wanted to get to, and it's kind of like looking ahead to the future. And are you a retire early kind of guy? Like, are you go hard for a few more years and then take the feet off, or will you keep going for the foreseeable?
I think my feelings on that change every day, and sometimes they change 3 or 4 times in that day. So I don't know. I think I'll just kind of keep going and see what happens. I don't know. Retire and then what? I mean, the idea of retiring would be quite nice. What would be nice to have like a sabbatical, like for 2 months a year or something, where you don't have to do anything in the middle of it. Like, to have more holidays would be quite nice, but I don't think that kind of works. Yeah. But no, I think I want to keep doing things. I think if I wasn't broadcasting now, I think it's in me, and I think if I wasn't doing it, I think I'd be deeply unhappy. I think that's what happens as a broadcaster.
Before Stephen starts the pre-wrap up, can I just ask one question?
Wrap up.
The pre-wrap up. How lucrative is it being the face of a New Zealand power company?
Well, I'm not. You mean, was it?
Yes,
how lucrative
was it?
Was it?
Was it?
Look, it's reasonably lucrative, and I mean, when that happened at the time, again, timing is everything. But it was just coming to the end of eating media lunch. And I'd never done anything commercially before, and then Chris Bleakley and John Plummer, 2 guys that worked at Saatchi's in Wellington for a long time. I think they wrote the Bugger ad. They came and they were working for a company called Assignment Advertising Agency, and they said, we look after Meridian, blah, 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 and we think you'd be quite good. We've written these ads with you fronting it, basically being you as you are on Eating Media Lunch. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, I don't know if I'm interested in doing ads, whatever. And then they said, you know, you could, if you don't like a word, you change a word. If you don't like it, blah, 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 blah. And then it ended up happening. So I said yes, even though at the time I thought, I'm not sure about advertising. I've got to be careful here. In the end, that was a good decision. That was a lucky decision because it was a 50-50. But that was definitely the right thing to do at the time, because then Eating Media Lunch, nobody wanted, well, we didn't want to make Eating Media Lunch anymore. And then I had other ideas that I was putting forward to TVNZ that weren't getting commissioned. And so that really came at a good time. And also I think at the time I was doing a bit of radio and other stuff, and it was not a massive commitment. It was sort of like 10 days a year or something. And it certainly pays a lot more doing that than it does doing radio or doing television. You know, that's just the way that it is. So I was very lucky with that. And it was a good company. They were great people to work with. Meridian is a very, you know, it's a good company. It's 100% renewable at a time when people weren't really that focused on that sort of stuff. So that's sort of, I felt like that was okay.
You ready for the pre-wrap?
This is a pre-wrap.
You go pre-wrap.
All right. I just want to say thanks for coming in. Had high expectations for this episode.
I'm sorry.
I think you've delivered.
I'm sorry.
But reflecting on it, the stuff you shared about the high school, the difficult years through the high school, and the fact that you were even thinking about, you know, ending it, or that things got that bad, and to see the success you've had, I think is a good lesson and good for people to hear who are going through their own struggles, to see, you know, push through it, come out the other side. But the breadth of your career and your life has brought me so much joy. So thank you so much for coming in.
That's such a nice thing to say. Thank you, Steve. That's very, very kind.
I'm not the outro guy, though.
See, if someone says a nice thing about you, it's like, oh, that's, you know, that's well worth everything that you do. You know, that's what it's all about. You hope that you entertain people. You never know. And then you meet people and someone says something nice to you and it makes you feel bloody good.
Well, strap yourself in.
Oh.
You spoke about luck earlier, and you're right. Like, it's amazing luck that we're in this position that we are right now. But you kind of make your own luck as well. So I get really inspired when we get the opportunity to talk to people that I've looked up to for a long, long time. And incredibly lucky, I think, to have seen your body of work. No matter what, you talk about magical moments. Some of the stuff that you've created since 1999, they're magical moments for me. They've accompanied me through times that I first saw them, through times when I was away that I wanted to tie myself back into New Zealand, times where you're feeling blue and you think, I'm just going to pop that on because I know it's going to give me a chuckle. So from that perspective, thank you very much for providing wonderful, wonderful, magical moments. And it's really humbling to be able to share what we do with someone like yourself, like Matt Heath, like Lee Hart, like those people that we've looked up to, and pick their brain and hear that their stories are not too different to ours in their own way. And it's just incredibly uplifting to kind of keep persevering and keep pushing forward. So thank you very much for spending some time with us, because we know you're an incredibly busy man.
Oh, look, firstly, don't be silly. Don't be silly. Like the idea of a body of work, I think that doesn't sound right to me. It's not really a body of work. Over the years, you just do some things, and then maybe you look back on it and you say, you know, it was a whole lot of stuff. But I mean, I don't know if I'd refer to it as a body of work, but I'm pleased that it's brought you, you know, even a little like smile in the corner of your mouth would be enough from me. So thank you. That's very, very nice thing to say, and I appreciate it. I don't necessarily agree that it's what I do has had a huge effect on people, but if it's made people smile, or it's brought any joy, or hasn't brought bad things, even if it hasn't brought bad things, then I reckon that's good. But just touching on that luck thing is an interesting one, because you might think that you make your own luck, and I think to a certain degree you do make some decisions. But the fact that you are born where you're born, in, you know, my situation, 1977, to two loving parents in, you know, in New Zealand, like, what a crazy piece of luck that was. And that's where it starts. Once that first piece of luck. Now, I didn't create that. I had nothing to do with that. I didn't do anything for that. And I could have been born in, 206 BC or something, and been a slave in 206 BC, or born slavery. And now that would have been a tough situation. So the fact that you're born in that position, and then the bits of luck that happen off from that are schools and people that you encounter that you have nothing to do with, is, I think, the most fascinating thing in life. Like, luck is the most interesting thing in the world, to me anyway. But I'm not sure I actually believe in the idea that you actually create your own luck. I think that the luck and the original luck that's created has nothing to do with you, which is the most amazing thing in the world. Even the fact that that there was even a universe. Do we want to go back that far?
We have.
But I reckon that's a big thing, is that you've got to recognise that in any given situation that really it's got nothing to do with you. That really there's a whole lot of other situations that have put you into this situation, and you should always feel lucky for that, because it's so little to do with you and more to do with everything else.
Well, I feel incredibly lucky today.
Cheers, Jeremy.